Listen up, Israel and America. I am Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and I confront you now, face to face, stripped of your diplomatic lies and covert games. For too long you have trampled on my homeland, Burkina Faso, treating our sacred soil like your personal intelligence playground. Your Mossad operatives, financed, armed, and protected by the CIA, have slithered through my streets, institutions, poisoned, and politics. You have undermined my government, manipulated people, and used nations' sons and daughters as expendable pawns in your sick, twisted global chess game. You thought I wouldn't notice. I was too weak, too distracted, too broken to fight back. You were wrong. I have personally hunted down your infiltrators. I have torn apart your clandestine networks with my own hands. And I tell you now, openly and without hesitation, there will be no mercy for anyone foreign or domestic who dares to destabilize my country from within. My nation is not for sale. My citizens are not your instruments. This is my land, our future, and I will defend it with every drop of blood in my veins. For years, America and Israel treated Africa like their personal playground. They sent Mossad agents, Israel's top spies, to build secret networks across our continent. These spies worked in darkness, stealing our information, controlling our leaders, and making up lies to help their home countries. What I saw through their tricks when others couldn't speak up. The proof was everywhere once you knew what to look for. American and Israeli agents had snuck into government offices, businesses, and community groups. They weren't there to help Africa, they came to steal and control. Evidence kept piling up until even blind people could see it. Secret meetings, strange activities, and planned operations showed how deep their spy network went. I didn't waste time talking. I kicked these foreign spies out of Burkina Faso immediately. The accumulation of proof didn't happen overnight. It was the result of careful observation, meticulous documentation, and patient intelligence gathering on our part. Every suspicious movement was tracked. Every unexplained meeting was noted. Every pattern that didn't fit normal diplomatic or business activity was flagged for further investigation. What emerged from this process was a picture so clear, so undeniable, that even those who wanted to look away couldn't ignore it anymore. The evidence wasn't subtle or ambiguous, it was overwhelming and irrefutable. Secret meetings were happening in locations that had no legitimate business hosting diplomatic discussions. Hotel rooms rented under false names, private residences that served as unofficial command centers, restaurants chosen specifically because they offered privacy and anonymity. These weren't chance encounters or casual social gatherings. They were coordinated operational meetings where foreign agents met with their local contacts, exchanged information, received instructions, and planned their next moves. The frequency of these meetings revealed the scale of the operation. This wasn't a small surveillance effort, it was a comprehensive intelligence network operating at full capacity. Strange activities began appearing everywhere once we knew what to look for. Personnel with diplomatic credentials were showing up in places that had nothing to do with diplomatic work. Why would someone from an embassy need to visit remote rural areas repeatedly? Why would cultural attachés spend so much time meeting with military officers? Why were certain foreign nationals maintaining contact with opposition figures, civil society activists, and media personalities? The patterns were unmistakable. These weren't people engaged in legitimate diplomatic or cultural exchange, they were intelligence operatives building networks of influence and information. Planned operations became visible through the coordination we observed. Activities that seemed random or coincidental were actually carefully synchronized. Media campaigns that appeared spontaneous were actually orchestrated from outside. Political movements that claimed to be grassroots were actually receiving foreign guidance and support. Economic decisions that seemed to reflect market forces were actually being influenced by external pressure applied through compromised officials. The spiderweb of foreign influence touched nearly every sector of national life. The depth of their spy network was staggering once we mapped it completely. They had penetrated government ministries at multiple levels. They had recruited sources within security services. They had established relationships with business leaders who controlled critical economic sectors. They had cultivated journalists who shaped public opinion. They had connected with academic institutions that influenced the next generation of leaders. They had embedded themselves in civil society organizations that claimed to represent the people's interests. The network wasn't just wide, it was deep, with redundant connections and multiple pathways to achieve their objectives. Understanding the full scope of this infiltration required connecting dots that others had either missed or deliberately ignored. It meant looking beyond individual incidents to see the larger pattern. It meant recognizing that seemingly unrelated events were actually parts of a coordinated strategy. It meant accepting that the problem was far bigger than anyone wanted to admit. Many people in positions of authority had grown comfortable with the presence of foreign intelligence operatives. Some benefited directly from the relationship. Others simply didn't want to confront the uncomfortable reality that our sovereignty had been compromised so thoroughly. But once the evidence reached critical mass, denial became impossible. Even those who had been skeptical, those who had dismissed earlier warnings as paranoia or exaggeration, had to acknowledge what was happening. The proof was too substantial, too well documented, too consistent across multiple sources. We weren't dealing with isolated incidents or rogue actors. We were facing a systematic, long-term intelligence operation designed to maintain foreign control over African decision-making. I didn't waste time talking because talk was exactly what they wanted. Endless discussions, committee meetings, diplomatic consultations, these are the tools used to delay action and dilute resolve. Every day spent debating what to do was another day their networks operated freely. Every hour spent seeking consensus was another hour they used to strengthen their positions and prepare countermeasures. I understood that decisive action was the only appropriate response to what we had discovered. The decision to expel foreign spies wasn't made lightly, but it was made quickly. Speed was essential. Intelligence operations depend on secrecy and time to adapt. If we had telegraphed our intentions, if we had engaged in prolonged deliberations, they would have had opportunities to hide evidence, protect assets, and establish alternative channels. Surprise was our advantage. By moving immediately and comprehensively, we caught them unprepared and unable to mount an effective defense. Kicking these foreign spies out of Burkina Faso required more than just issuing expulsion orders. It demanded a coordinated operation involving multiple government agencies. Security services had to identify all known and suspected operatives. Immigration authorities had to revoke visas and credentials. Law enforcement had to ensure compliance with expulsion orders. Border control had to prevent unauthorized departures that might allow operatives to destroy evidence or harm local contacts. The entire operation had to be executed simultaneously to prevent any part of the network from warning other parts or taking protective measures. The immediate expulsion sent an unmistakable message. Burkina Faso would no longer tolerate foreign intelligence operations on its soil. We would no longer accept the fiction that these individuals were legitimate diplomats, business people, or aid workers. We would no longer pretend that their activities were benign or that their presence served our national interests. The era of looking the other way had ended. The time for accommodation and compromise had passed. We were reclaiming our sovereignty through direct, unambiguous action. The expulsion also served a broader strategic purpose beyond removing specific individuals. It disrupted years of careful network building. Relationships that had taken months or years to develop were severed instantly. Sources who had been cultivated and compromised suddenly lost their handlers. Operations that were in progress were terminated before completion. Intelligence that was being gathered stopped flowing. The entire infrastructure that foreign agencies had built in Burkina Faso was dismantled in a matter of days. This wasn't just about removing people, it was about breaking a system of control. Every expelled operative represented a node in a larger network. Every severed connection weakened the overall structure. Every disrupted operation reduced their capability to influence our affairs. By acting decisively and comprehensively, we didn't just address individual problems, we attacked the fundamental architecture of foreign intelligence presence in our country. The speed of our action also protected those who might have been vulnerable to retaliation. Foreign intelligence services often use intimidation and violence to protect their operations and punish those who expose them. By moving quickly, we limited their ability to identify who had provided information or cooperated with our investigation. By expelling operatives immediately, we reduced the window during which they could take revenge against local contacts or destroy evidence that might implicate others. The international reaction to the expulsions revealed just how significant our action was. Diplomatic protests came swiftly from Washington and Tel Aviv. They demanded explanations, insisted we had made mistakes, and threatened consequences for our actions. But their protests only confirmed what we already knew: we had struck a nerve. If these were truly innocent diplomats and legitimate foreign nationals, the reaction would have been measured and procedural. Instead, we saw panic, anger, and threats. Their response validated our assessment that we had successfully disrupted major intelligence operations. Other African nations watched what happened in Burkina Faso with great interest. Some leaders privately expressed support, acknowledging that they face similar problems but lacked the courage or capacity to address them. Others remained publicly silent, unwilling to antagonize powerful foreign governments but also unable to criticize our actions without appearing complicit in foreign interference. A few openly criticized our decision, revealing either their own dependence on foreign support or their failure to recognize the threat that foreign intelligence operations pose to African sovereignty. The expulsion of foreign spies from Burkina Faso represents a turning point not just for our nation, but potentially for the entire continent. It demonstrates that African countries can identify foreign intelligence operations, can develop the capability to counter them, and can summon the political will to act decisively. It proves that sovereignty isn't just an abstract concept discussed in international forums, it's a practical reality that must be defended through concrete actions. The path forward requires vigilance and continued effort. Expelling known operatives doesn't eliminate the threat permanently. Intelligence agencies will attempt to rebuild their networks using different methods and different personnel. They will learn from their mistakes and adapt their approaches. Our security services must remain alert, our government must remain committed to protecting national sovereignty, and our people must remain aware of the ongoing threat that foreign interference poses to our independence. But the immediate action we took, the decision not to waste time talking but instead to kick these foreign spies out immediately, established a precedent and demonstrated a capability that will serve us well in future confrontations. We showed that Burkina Faso is not a passive victim of foreign manipulation. We are an active defender of our own interests, capable of identifying threats and responding effectively. That reputation, that demonstrated capacity for decisive action, is itself a form of deterrence that may prevent future attempts at infiltration and control. The evidence was clear, the network was exposed, the decision was made, the action was taken. Foreign spies who thought they could operate with impunity in Burkina Faso learned otherwise, and the message to other foreign intelligence services considering similar operations is equally clear. Africa is no longer an easy target, and leaders like myself are willing to defend our sovereignty regardless of the cost. This fight is bigger than just security. It's about Africa's right to be free. America and Israel want to control African countries like puppets on strings. But no nation can truly be independent when foreign spies are making decisions behind closed doors. When I shut down their operations, it sent shockwaves to Washington and Tel Aviv. What they thought was untouchable suddenly got destroyed. I stood up to two of the world's most powerful countries and won. This battle represents something far deeper than protecting borders or maintaining order within our territory. What we're confronting here strikes at the very heart of what it means to exist as a sovereign nation. For generations, Africa has been told how to think, where to look, and who to trust. We've been fed narratives manufactured in foreign capitals, designed not to inform us but to control us. The struggle we're engaged in today is about reclaiming our right to determine our own destiny without interference from powers who view our continent as nothing more than a strategic asset to be exploited. America and Israel have operated under the assumption that African nations exist in a permanent state of weakness, forever dependent on their guidance and intervention. They've positioned themselves as benefactors while simultaneously undermining the very foundations of our autonomy. Their intelligence networks didn't arrive here by accident. They were carefully planted, meticulously cultivated, and strategically expanded over decades. These weren't partnerships built on mutual respect. They were occupation forces disguised as diplomatic missions. The puppet master metaphor isn't just rhetoric. It describes the actual mechanism of control that's been deployed across our continent. When foreign agents infiltrate government ministries, they don't just gather information, they shape policy. When they embed themselves in economic institutions, they don't just observe transactions, they manipulate markets. When they position operatives within civil society organizations, they don't just monitor public opinion, they manufacture it. Every string they pull moves an African leader, an African policy, or an African resource in a direction that serves their interests, not ours. True independence cannot coexist with this level of foreign penetration. A nation might have its own flag, its own anthem, and its own seat at international forums, but if critical decisions are being influenced by foreign intelligence services operating in the shadows, that nation is independent in name only. The sovereignty we claim on paper becomes meaningless when the actual levers of power are being operated by hands that answer to Washington and Tel Aviv rather than to African citizens. The historical context of this interference stretches back through colonialism, through the Cold War, and into the present era. The methods have evolved, but the fundamental objective remains unchanged: maintain control over African resources, African markets, and African strategic positions. What once required military occupation and colonial administration now operates through intelligence networks, economic pressure, and political manipulation. The chains are less visible than they were a century ago, but they're no less real and no less restrictive. Understanding this history is essential to understanding why the current fight matters so profoundly. We're not confronting a new problem, we're confronting the latest iteration of a problem that has plagued Africa since foreign powers first recognized the continent's value. Every generation of African leaders has faced some version of this challenge. Some resisted and paid terrible prices. Others accommodated and watched their nations sink deeper into dependency. The question facing us today is whether we will finally break this cycle or whether we will pass it on to yet another generation. When I made the decision to dismantle these networks, I understood the magnitude of what I was confronting. These weren't amateur operations run by inexperienced agents. We were facing Mossad, an organization with a global reputation for ruthlessness and effectiveness. We were challenging CIA-backed infrastructure that had been decades in the making. The conventional wisdom said this was impossible. Smaller nations don't challenge superpowers. Developing countries don't expel the intelligence apparatus of the world's most powerful nations. The unwritten rules of international relations suggested we should look the other way, accept the situation as unchangeable, and focus on managing the relationship rather than ending it. But I rejected that framework entirely. Those unwritten rules were created by the same powers that benefit from them. They're not laws of nature, they're constructs designed to maintain existing hierarchies of power. The moment we accept that certain things are untouchable, we've already surrendered our sovereignty. The moment we decide that some violations are too big to confront, we've accepted our own subjugation. The intelligence apparatus we were confronting had spent years building credibility and connections. They had invested enormous resources in establishing cover identities, developing local relationships, and creating the appearance of legitimacy. Some posed as diplomats with official credentials and immunity. Others operated as business people with seemingly legitimate commercial interests. Still others presented themselves as aid workers, journalists, or academics pursuing worthy goals. The diversity of their covers made detection difficult and expulsion complicated. Each category of operative required different handling. Diplomats could claim immunity and demand protection under international conventions. Business operatives could threaten economic consequences and mobilize corporate pressure. Aid workers could appeal to humanitarian concerns and generate sympathetic media coverage. The complexity of the network meant that any action against it would face multiple forms of resistance and generate criticism from multiple directions. The operation to shut down foreign intelligence networks in Burkina Faso required precise planning and absolute commitment. We couldn't afford mistakes. We couldn't show hesitation. Any sign of weakness would have been exploited. Any gap in our resolve would have been widened. The networks we were dismantling had connections at every level: political, economic, military, and social. Removing them meant cutting ties that many considered essential. It meant accepting isolation from powers that could make life difficult for us. It meant standing alone when the safer path would have been to accommodate and compromise. Planning the operation required months of careful preparation that had to remain completely secret. We had to identify all known operatives while assuming there were others we hadn't detected. We had to map the network structure to understand which nodes were critical and which were peripheral. We had to assess potential responses and prepare contingencies for various scenarios. We had to coordinate across multiple government agencies while limiting information to only those who absolutely needed to know. Any leak would have compromised the entire operation. The intelligence gathering phase was particularly challenging. We were essentially spying on spies, people trained to detect surveillance and avoid detection. We had to use methods they wouldn't anticipate while avoiding techniques they would recognize. We had to gather evidence that would stand up to scrutiny while maintaining operational security. We had to build a complete picture of their activities without alerting them to our investigation. What we discovered during this investigation was both shocking and illuminating. The scale of foreign intelligence presence exceeded even our worst estimates. The depth of penetration into government institutions revealed vulnerabilities we hadn't fully appreciated. The sophistication of their operations demonstrated capabilities that demanded respect even as we prepared to dismantle them. Understanding what we were facing made the challenge more daunting but also more urgent. The reaction from Washington and Tel Aviv confirmed everything we suspected about the nature of these operations. The shockwaves weren't just diplomatic protests or stern warnings through official channels. What we witnessed was genuine panic from intelligence communities that had grown comfortable with their access and influence. For years, they operated with impunity, confident that no African leader would dare to challenge them directly. Their networks were considered permanent fixtures, as untouchable as embassies, and as protected as diplomatic personnel. When those networks suddenly ceased to exist, when their carefully cultivated assets were expelled and their operations were exposed, it shattered their assumptions about African capabilities and African resolve. They had underestimated us completely. They viewed African leaders as either complicit partners in their schemes or powerless observers unable to resist. The possibility that we might actually identify their operations, develop the capacity to counter them, and possess the political will to act decisively, that scenario apparently never entered their calculations. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and intense. Phone calls from foreign capitals demanded explanations and reversals. Ambassadors requested urgent meetings to express their government's displeasure. International media coverage portrayed our actions as reckless or destabilizing. Economic threats were made, both explicitly and implicitly. Aid programs were reviewed. Trade relationships were questioned. The pressure campaign was designed to force us to back down, to reverse our decision, to restore the status quo that served their interests. But we held firm. Every threat only confirmed that we had made the right decision. If our actions were truly unjustified, if we had genuinely made a mistake, the response would have been different. The intensity of their reaction revealed how much they had invested in these networks and how much they stood to lose from their dismantling. Their panic was our validation. Standing up to two of the world's most powerful countries wasn't about bravado or recklessness. It was about recognizing a fundamental truth. Real power doesn't come from military might or economic dominance alone. Real power comes from the willingness to defend your principles even when the cost is high. America and Israel have vast resources, sophisticated technology, and global reach. But they also have vulnerabilities. Their intelligence operations depend on secrecy. Their influence depends on cooperation. Their control depends on our acceptance. The moment we refuse to accept their presence, the moment we exposed their operations rather than protecting them, the moment we expelled their agents rather than accommodating them in that moment, we demonstrated that their power has limits. We proved that African nations aren't helpless victims waiting to be rescued or managed. We're capable actors with agency, intelligence, and strength. This realization is perhaps the most important outcome of the entire operation. For too long, African nations have internalized a sense of inferiority and dependence. We've accepted narratives that portray us as perpetually behind, perpetually needing guidance, perpetually incapable of managing our own affairs. These narratives serve those who benefit from African weakness. They justify intervention, excuse exploitation, and normalize control. Breaking free from these narratives requires more than words. It requires action that demonstrates capability and resolve. The technical aspects of the expulsion operation were complex and required careful coordination. We had to revoke visas and diplomatic credentials simultaneously to prevent any operatives from fleeing before we could document their activities. We had to secure their residences and offices to preserve evidence and prevent destruction of materials. We had to monitor communications to identify any attempts to activate sleeper agents or emergency protocols. We had to manage the logistics of actually removing dozens of people from the country while ensuring they couldn't take sensitive materials with them. Each step of the process presented challenges and risks. Diplomatic immunity complicated our ability to search certain individuals or locations. Some operatives had dual citizenship or multiple passports that created jurisdictional questions. Others had local family members or business partners who weren't themselves intelligence operatives but who might face consequences from association. We had to balance thoroughness with fairness, ensuring that we targeted actual threats without causing unnecessary harm to innocent people. The domestic political dimension added another layer of complexity. Some of the expelled operatives had developed genuine relationships with Burkinabe citizens. Some had been in the country for years and were integrated into local communities. Their sudden removal raised questions and concerns among people who knew them as neighbors, colleagues, or friends. We had to explain our actions without revealing classified information or compromising ongoing investigations. We had to maintain public support while managing legitimate concerns about due process and evidence. Opposition political figures seized on the expulsions as an opportunity to criticize the government. Some claimed we were acting rashly or damaging important relationships. Others suggested we were inventing threats to distract from domestic problems. A few even accused us of acting on behalf of rival foreign powers. These criticisms were predictable and largely ineffective, but they required responses and consumed political capital that might have been used elsewhere. International media coverage ranged from skeptical to hostile. Western outlets largely accepted the narrative promoted by American and Israeli officials that we had expelled innocent diplomats and business people without cause. African media was more balanced but still cautious, uncertain whether to celebrate our assertiveness or worry about potential consequences. Social media became a battleground where competing narratives fought for dominance. Our ability to shape this conversation was limited by the classified nature of much of our evidence. The Western media's response was predictable yet still disappointing in its uniformity. Major newspapers, television networks, and online platforms presented nearly identical framing of events. They portrayed Burkina Faso as acting irrationally, driven by paranoia rather than legitimate security concerns. They emphasized the credentials and reputations of expelled individuals while dismissing our evidence as unsubstantiated or politically motivated. The consistency of this messaging revealed coordination rather than independent journalism. Editorial boards questioned our judgment and competence. Opinion pieces suggested we were damaging important relationships over imagined threats. Analysis segments featured experts who had never visited Burkina Faso but confidently declared our actions unjustified. The underlying assumption in all this coverage was that African nations lacked the sophistication to accurately assess intelligence threats and should defer to Western judgment on such matters. This patronizing attitude itself demonstrated why our action was necessary. The specific language used in Western media reports was carefully chosen to shape perception. Expelled operatives were consistently described as diplomats and business people rather than intelligence officers. Our evidence was characterized as allegations and claims rather than documented proof. Our government statements were presented as accusations, while American and Israeli denials were reported as responses or clarifications. These subtle linguistic choices accumulated to create an overall narrative that favored foreign powers over African sovereignty. Television coverage was particularly biased in its visual presentation. Footage of expelled individuals showed them looking professional and sympathetic, often with families, emphasizing their apparent normalcy. Coverage of our government showed military uniforms and stern expressions, reinforcing stereotypes about African authoritarianism. The juxtaposition was deliberate, designed to generate sympathy for those expelled and suspicion toward those who expelled them. African media approached the story with more nuance but also more hesitation. Many outlets recognized the significance of our action and the legitimacy of concerns about foreign interference. However, they also worried about potential backlash and consequences. Some publications celebrated our assertiveness in editorials while maintaining neutral tone in news coverage. Others avoided taking clear positions, presenting multiple perspectives without endorsing any particular interpretation. The caution in African media reflected genuine uncertainty about how events would unfold. Would Burkina Faso face severe retaliation that would serve as a warning to other nations? Would our action inspire similar moves across the continent? Would international institutions intervene to mediate or escalate tensions? These unknowns made African journalists and editors reluctant to commit fully to either celebrating or criticizing our decision. Regional differences emerged in African media coverage. West African outlets, given geographic and cultural proximity to Burkina Faso, generally provided more sympathetic treatment. East and Southern African media maintained greater distance, covering the story as significant but not directly relevant to their regions. North African media, with different historical relationships to Western powers, offered varied perspectives that reflected their own complex positions regarding foreign influence. Language barriers also affected coverage patterns. Francophone African media engaged more deeply with the story given Burkina Faso's Francophone identity. Anglophone outlets covered it, but often as secondary to other regional concerns. This linguistic divide in attention and analysis reflected broader continental fragmentation that complicates collective African responses to shared challenges. Social media became a battleground where competing narratives fought for dominance. Our ability to shape this conversation was limited by the classified nature of much of our evidence. The social media dimension of this conflict represented entirely new territory in African struggles for sovereignty. Previous generations of leaders confronted foreign interference without having to simultaneously manage global online discourse. The speed, reach, and complexity of social media created both opportunities and challenges that required new strategies and capabilities. Pro-Western accounts flooded platforms with content supporting expelled operatives and criticizing our government. These campaigns showed clear signs of coordination, similar talking points appearing simultaneously across multiple accounts, identical images and hashtags spreading rapidly, suspicious patterns of engagement that suggested artificial amplification. Whether these campaigns were organized by intelligence services, public relations firms, or ideological activists was unclear, but their coordinated nature was unmistakable. The content of these campaigns followed predictable patterns: personal stories, humanized expelled individuals, emphasizing their families, their work, their contributions to local communities. These narratives aimed to generate sympathy and portray expulsions as cruel or unjust. Simultaneously, other content attacked our government's credibility, questioned our evidence, and suggested ulterior motives for our actions. The combination sought to shift focus from foreign interference to alleged African misconduct. Countering these campaigns proved difficult for several reasons. First, we could not publicly release classified intelligence that would conclusively prove our case without compromising sources and methods. Second, we lacked the resources and infrastructure to match the scale and sophistication of professionally organized information operations. Third, platform algorithms often favored sensational or emotional content over factual but less engaging material, giving advantage to those willing to manipulate sentiment rather than present evidence. African social media users engaged vigorously in these debates, often without clear information about what had actually occurred. Some defended our actions based on general principles about sovereignty and foreign interference. Others questioned our decisions based on incomplete or misleading information from Western sources. Still others remained uncertain, caught between competing narratives without sufficient evidence to judge which was accurate. The generational dimension of social media discourse was particularly interesting. Younger Africans, more active on digital platforms and more exposed to global media, often expressed skepticism about our actions. They had grown up consuming Western media and absorbing its perspectives on African governance. Older generations, with longer memories of colonialism and foreign exploitation, more readily accepted that foreign powers might indeed operate covert networks across Africa. Despite these challenges, public opinion within Burkina Faso remained largely supportive. People understood, even without seeing all the evidence, that we were defending national sovereignty against foreign interference. The principle resonated even with those who questioned specific details. There was pride in seeing our nation stand up to powerful foreign governments, rather than simply accepting their dictates. This public support proved crucial in maintaining political viability for the operation. Domestic support rested on foundations deeper than any single incident or decision. Burkinabe citizens had lived experience of foreign interference in their country's affairs. They had seen how external pressures influenced political decisions, how foreign interests shaped economic policies, how outside powers meddled in internal matters. They didn't need classified intelligence briefings to know that foreign actors operated in ways that didn't serve Burkina Faso's interests. Public meetings and community discussions revealed the depth of this understanding. Citizens shared stories of suspicious foreign activities they had observed, unusual questions asked by supposed aid workers, strange interest shown by business people in matters unrelated to their ostensible work, unexplained presence of foreigners in sensitive locations. These anecdotal accounts, while not constituting formal evidence, created a collective awareness that foreign intelligence operations were real and present. The pride people expressed in our action reflected something profound about national identity and dignity. For too long, Burkina Faso and other African nations had been passive recipients of foreign decisions. We were told what policies to implement, what relationships to maintain, what positions to take on international issues. The act of asserting our own judgment, of prioritizing our own security assessment over foreign preferences, represented a reclamation of agency that resonated emotionally, even with those who might question tactical details. This emotional resonance proved more powerful than any information campaign could achieve. When people feel their dignity and autonomy are at stake, they rally around leaders who defend those values. The technical questions about specific individuals or particular evidence mattered less than the fundamental principle. Burkina Faso would determine its own security policies based on its own assessment of its own interests. This principle commanded broad support across different social groups and political perspectives. Religious and traditional leaders played important roles in building and maintaining this support. Their endorsements carried weight in communities where formal government authority was often viewed with some skepticism. When respected elders and spiritual figures affirmed that defending sovereignty was righteous and necessary, it reinforced public backing for our actions. These voices helped frame the issue in moral and cultural terms that complemented the security and political arguments. Youth organizations, despite their greater exposure to Western media narratives, also generally supported the expulsions. Young people understood that their future depended on genuine independence and self-determination. They recognized that foreign control, however subtle or sophisticated, would limit their opportunities and constrain their potential. Their support reflected not blind nationalism, but rather informed calculation about what kind of country they wanted to build and inherit. This victory belongs not just to Burkina Faso, but to every African nation tired of being treated as a subordinate player in global affairs. It proves that resistance is possible, that sovereignty can be reclaimed, and that the future of Africa will be written by Africans, not by foreign intelligence agencies operating from the shadows. The continental significance of our action cannot be overstated. For decades, African nations have operated under constraints that other regions would never accept. Foreign intelligence services have moved freely across our borders, recruited our citizens, influenced our policies, and extracted our resources. This situation was treated as normal, as the natural order of things, as simply how the world works. Our action challenged that assumption and demonstrated an alternative is possible. The symbolic power of one African nation successfully confronting major foreign intelligence operations resonates across the continent. It shows that capability exists, that will can be summoned, that consequences can be managed. Every African leader who previously believed such action was impossible now has proof otherwise. Every African security service that thought foreign intelligence operations were too sophisticated to counter now has a model to study and adapt. Every African citizen who felt powerless in the face of foreign domination now has reason for hope. The broader implications of our action extend far beyond our borders. Every African leader now knows that confronting foreign intelligence operations is possible. Every African security service now has a model for how such operations can be identified and dismantled. Every African citizen now has evidence that their nations need not accept foreign interference as inevitable. The precedent we've established creates space for others to act. This precedent operates on multiple levels simultaneously. At the technical level, it demonstrates that African intelligence and security services can identify foreign operatives, map their networks, and execute complex operations to neutralize them. The assumption that only Western intelligence agencies possess sophisticated capabilities has been challenged. African services may lack some resources and technologies available to wealthier nations, but they possess advantages in local knowledge, cultural understanding, and motivation that can offset those gaps. At the political level, our action shows that leaders can make these decisions and survive the consequences. The political risks were real: potential isolation, economic retaliation, loss of aid and investment, criticism from international partners. But these risks proved manageable. The sky did not fall. The nation did not collapse. Life continued, and in many ways improved, because we were no longer operating under foreign surveillance and manipulation. At the diplomatic level, we demonstrated that African nations can set terms for relationships rather than simply accepting whatever terms foreign powers dictate. The traditional model assumed African nations needed Western partners more than Western partners needed African nations. This asymmetry supposedly gave foreign powers leverage to demand accommodation of their intelligence operations as a condition of broader relationships. By rejecting that framework, we opened space for more balanced partnerships based on genuine mutual respect. Some nations have already begun reviewing their own situations with fresh eyes. Intelligence services across the continent are reassessing foreign presence and activities. Political leaders are asking harder questions about the true nature of various diplomatic and commercial relationships. Civil society organizations are scrutinizing funding sources and external connections more carefully. The ripple effects of our action are creating a continental conversation about sovereignty and foreign interference. But the question has been asked and cannot be unasked. Every African leader must now decide where they stand. Every African security service must now assess what foreign intelligence operations exist within their borders. Every African citizen must now consider what true independence means and whether their nation possesses it. The conversation we've started will continue regardless of what any individual nation decides to do. The future of Africa depends on these choices. If we collectively decide to reclaim our sovereignty, to expel foreign intelligence operations, to insist on genuine independence, we can transform the continent's relationship with the rest of the world. We can establish ourselves as equal partners rather than subordinate clients. We can control our own resources, determine our own policies, and shape our own destinies. The potential for transformation is immense. But if we fail to act collectively, if only a few nations take this stand while others continue accommodating foreign interference, the transformation will be limited. Foreign powers will adapt their strategies, focusing on nations that remain compliant while isolating those that resist. The continent will remain divided, with some nations genuinely independent, while others remain effectively controlled. The opportunity for comprehensive change will be lost. This scenario of partial action and incomplete transformation represents perhaps the greatest risk we face. History shows us that isolated acts of resistance, however courageous, can be contained and neutralized when they lack broader support. Foreign powers have centuries of experience managing dissent and maintaining control even when some actors refuse to cooperate. They will simply redirect their resources and attention to more receptive environments while applying pressure to isolate and undermine those who resist. The mechanics of this containment strategy are well established and predictable. Nations that expel foreign intelligence operations will face coordinated pressure designed to make them examples of what happens when you challenge Western interests. Economic sanctions may be imposed through various mechanisms: aid cutoffs, trade restrictions, investment barriers, exclusion from financial systems. Diplomatic isolation will be pursued through regional organizations, international institutions, and bilateral relationships. Media campaigns will portray resistant nations as unstable, authoritarian, or aligned with hostile foreign powers. Meanwhile, nations that continue accommodating foreign interference will be rewarded with increased aid, favorable trade terms, diplomatic support, and positive media coverage. The contrast will be stark and intentional. Cooperation brings prosperity and integration, while resistance brings hardship and isolation. This carrot-and-stick approach has proven effective in maintaining control and discouraging collective action throughout the post-colonial era. The division this creates within Africa serves foreign interests perfectly. A fragmented continent cannot speak with one voice or act with unified purpose. Nations competing for foreign favor will undermine each other rather than supporting common interests. Regional organizations will be paralyzed by internal disagreements. Continental institutions will lack the consensus needed for meaningful action. The dream of African unity, already challenged by linguistic, cultural, and historical differences, will face additional obstacles created by divergent relationships with foreign powers. This fragmentation extends beyond formal diplomatic and economic relationships into deeper questions of identity and orientation. Nations that maintain close ties with Western intelligence services often adopt Western perspectives on continental issues. They become advocates for foreign interests within African forums, arguing positions that serve external powers rather than African peoples. This ideological colonization may be more subtle than physical occupation, but it is no less effective in maintaining control. The lost opportunity for comprehensive change would haunt future generations. We stand at a moment when transformation is possible, when the old order is weakening, when African capabilities are growing, when global power dynamics are shifting. If we fail to seize this moment collectively, if we allow ourselves to be divided and contained, we may not see another such opportunity for decades. The window for fundamental change may close, leaving us trapped in modified versions of the same subordinate relationships that have constrained African development since independence. The choice is ours. The moment is now. The example has been set. What Africa becomes in the coming decades will be determined by the decisions we make today. Will we choose sovereignty or subordination? Will we choose independence or accommodation? Will we choose to write our own future or allow others to write it for us? These questions demand answers not in abstract philosophical terms, but in concrete policy decisions made by actual leaders governing real nations. Every African head of state, every minister of defense, every intelligence chief, every parliamentary leader faces these questions right now. Their choices will accumulate to determine continental trajectory. There is no neutral position, no way to avoid deciding. Inaction is itself a choice to maintain the status quo, to accept continued foreign interference, to prioritize short-term stability over long-term sovereignty. The sovereignty option requires courage but offers dignity and genuine independence. It means accepting risks and costs in exchange for the right to determine our own path. It means building our own capabilities rather than depending on foreign support that comes with strings attached. It means standing with other African nations rather than competing for foreign favor. It means thinking in terms of generations rather than election cycles, recognizing that true independence may require sacrifices today that will benefit our children and grandchildren. The subordination option offers apparent safety but guarantees continued dependency. It means accepting foreign intelligence operations as the price of aid and investment. It means allowing external powers to influence or control key decisions. It means remaining within systems designed to extract African resources and constrain African development. It means passing the same fundamental problems to future generations, who will face even greater challenges as foreign control becomes more deeply entrenched and harder to challenge. The independence option demands that we develop our own economic models, our own security frameworks, our own diplomatic strategies. It requires investing in education, technology, and infrastructure that reduce dependency on foreign systems. It means building regional and continental institutions strong enough to support member nations when they face external pressure. It means creating alternative networks of trade, finance, and cooperation that don't require submission to foreign intelligence penetration. The accommodation option locks us into existing global hierarchies, where Africa remains at the bottom. It means accepting that our resources will be extracted at prices set by others, that our policies will be influenced by foreign interests, that our future will be shaped by external agendas. It means watching our most talented citizens emigrate because opportunities at home are limited by systems designed to keep us dependent. It means explaining to our children why their continent, rich in resources and human potential, remains poor and powerless. I have made my choice. Burkina Faso has made its choice. We stand for sovereignty, for independence, for the right to determine our own destiny free from foreign interference. We invite other African nations to join us in this stand. Together, we can transform the continent. Together, we can reclaim what has been taken from us. Together, we can build an Africa that is truly free. This invitation is extended with full awareness of what it entails. We are not promising easy paths or quick victories. We are not suggesting that independence comes without cost or that sovereignty requires no sacrifice. We are offering partnership in a difficult but necessary struggle to reclaim African agency and build genuine self-determination. We are proposing that we face challenges together rather than allowing ourselves to be isolated and defeated separately. The transformation we envision is comprehensive and fundamental. It goes beyond merely expelling foreign intelligence operatives to reimagining Africa's place in the world. It means building economies that serve African needs rather than foreign extraction. It means developing security systems that protect African interests rather than foreign assets. It means creating political frameworks that empower African citizens rather than foreign powers. It means establishing educational systems that prepare African youth for African futures rather than emigration to foreign countries. This transformation requires coordination and cooperation across the continent. No single nation, however determined, can achieve it alone. Burkina Faso's action against foreign intelligence networks matters, but it will have lasting impact only if other nations take similar stands. Each nation that acts strengthens all others by demonstrating collective resolve and making it harder for foreign powers to isolate and punish individual resistors. Each nation that refuses to act weakens all others by providing foreign powers with compliant alternatives and dividing African solidarity. The call to action is clear and urgent. African leaders must assess foreign intelligence presence in their own countries and take appropriate action. African security services must develop capabilities to identify and counter foreign operations. African citizens must demand that their governments prioritize sovereignty over convenience. African institutions must support member nations that face pressure for defending their independence. The work is difficult, but the alternative, continued subordination, is unacceptable. This call to action is not abstract or theoretical. It requires concrete steps that can begin immediately. African leaders must commission comprehensive audits of foreign presence within their territories. Every embassy must be scrutinized to determine whether staff numbers match legitimate diplomatic functions or whether they conceal intelligence operations. Every foreign-funded organization must be examined to verify that its activities align with stated missions rather than serving covert agendas. Every business with foreign ownership must be assessed to ensure it operates transparently rather than providing cover for espionage. These assessments require political will more than technical sophistication. The information needed often already exists within government files, intelligence reports, and security service observations. What has been lacking is not knowledge but courage, the willingness to acknowledge what is known and act upon it. Leaders have often chosen to ignore evidence of foreign interference because confronting it seemed too difficult or too costly. That calculation must change. The cost of continued interference far exceeds any short-term benefits of maintaining comfortable relationships with foreign powers. African security services face the challenge of developing capabilities that match the sophistication of foreign intelligence operations. This development cannot happen overnight, but it must begin now. Training programs must be established or enhanced to teach counterintelligence techniques, surveillance detection, network analysis, and operational security. Regional cooperation must be strengthened so that services can share information, coordinate responses, and support each other when facing common threats. Technology investments must be made in communication security, data protection, and monitoring systems. The capability gap between African and Western intelligence services is real but not insurmountable. African services possess advantages that can offset superior foreign resources. Local knowledge provides insight that outsiders cannot easily acquire. Cultural understanding enables identification of activities that seem normal to foreigners but appear suspicious to those familiar with local patterns. Motivation to defend homeland creates commitment that mercenary operatives cannot match. These advantages, properly leveraged, can enable effective counterintelligence even against better-funded adversaries. Cooperation among African security services represents untapped potential for continental defense. Currently, services often operate in isolation, each dealing independently with foreign intelligence threats. A coordinated approach would multiply effectiveness dramatically. When one service identifies a foreign operative, that information should be shared continually so others can track the same individual or organization. When one nation successfully dismantles a network, the methods and lessons should be disseminated so others can replicate success. When foreign powers retaliate against nations that resist their operations, others should provide support to demonstrate that isolation is impossible. African citizens must demand that their governments prioritize sovereignty over convenience. This civic pressure is essential because leaders often face competing incentives. Foreign powers offer immediate benefits, aid packages, trade deals, diplomatic support in exchange for accommodation of their intelligence operations. Without domestic pressure to resist these offers, leaders may choose short-term gains over long-term independence. Citizens must make clear that they value sovereignty more than foreign aid, that they prefer hardship with dignity over comfort with subordination. This citizen engagement requires awareness and organization. Many Africans remain unaware of the extent of foreign intelligence penetration in their countries. Information about these operations is often classified or suppressed, leaving populations ignorant of threats to their sovereignty. Civil society organizations, media outlets, academic institutions, and community leaders must work to educate citizens about foreign interference and mobilize support for defensive actions. Public discourse must shift from accepting foreign presence as inevitable to questioning it as potentially threatening. The methods of citizen engagement can take many forms appropriate to different contexts. In democratic systems, electoral pressure can be applied to leaders who accommodate foreign interference. Protests and demonstrations can highlight public opposition to foreign intelligence operations. Media campaigns can expose suspicious activities and demand government response. In less democratic contexts, traditional authority structures, religious organizations, and community networks can convey popular sentiment to those in power. The key is making clear that citizens recognize the threat and expect their leaders to address it. African institutions must support member nations that face pressure for defending their independence. The work is difficult, but the alternative, continued subordination, is unacceptable. Regional organizations like the African Union, Economic Community of West African States, Southern African Development Community, and others must evolve from forums for discussion into mechanisms for mutual defense against foreign interference. When one member nation expels foreign intelligence operatives and faces retaliation, other members should provide economic support, diplomatic backing, and public solidarity. The message to foreign powers must be clear. Attacking one African nation for defending its sovereignty means confronting the entire continent. This institutional support requires new frameworks and mechanisms that currently do not exist or function inadequately. Continental and regional bodies need protocols for responding to foreign retaliation against member states. They need funds or credit facilities to provide emergency economic assistance when aid is cut or sanctions imposed. They need diplomatic coordination to present unified positions in international forums. They need media strategies to counter negative narratives promoted by foreign powers and their allied outlets. The difficulty of this work cannot be minimized or dismissed. Building these capabilities, changing these relationships, confronting these powers, all of it requires sustained effort over years or decades. There will be setbacks and failures. Some nations will face severe consequences for their resistance. Some leaders will lose power because they prioritize sovereignty over accommodation. Some citizens will suffer economic hardship because their countries chose independence over dependency. These costs are real and must be acknowledged honestly. The timeline for transformation extends far beyond single presidential terms or electoral cycles. Building robust counterintelligence capabilities requires recruiting and training personnel, establishing institutional frameworks, acquiring necessary technologies, and developing operational experience through practice. These processes cannot be rushed without compromising effectiveness. A security service hastily assembled will make mistakes that foreign intelligence agencies will exploit. Systems implemented without proper planning will contain vulnerabilities that undermine their purpose. The work demands patience and persistence even when immediate results seem elusive. Changing relationships with foreign powers involves renegotiating decades of established patterns and expectations. Diplomatic protocols, economic arrangements, military cooperation agreements, intelligence sharing frameworks, all of these have been structured to facilitate foreign access and influence. Dismantling or restructuring them triggers resistance from multiple directions. Foreign governments object to losing privileged positions. Domestic constituencies that benefit from existing arrangements oppose changes that threaten their interests. International institutions pressure nations to maintain status quo relationships. Overcoming this combined resistance requires extraordinary political skill and unwavering commitment. Confronting powerful nations carries inherent risks that cannot be eliminated entirely. The United States and Israel possess vast capabilities to reward cooperation and punish resistance. They can mobilize economic pressure through multiple channels, aid cutoffs, trade barriers, investment restrictions, financial system exclusions, currency manipulations. They can orchestrate diplomatic isolation through bilateral relationships, regional organizations, and international institutions. They can deploy media campaigns to damage reputations and undermine legitimacy. They can support opposition movements and destabilization efforts. These tools have been used effectively against nations that challenged Western interests throughout the post-colonial period. The setbacks and failures that will inevitably occur must be anticipated and prepared for, rather than treated as reasons to abandon the effort. Intelligence operations will sometimes fail to detect foreign activities. Counterintelligence efforts will occasionally target innocent individuals while missing actual operatives. Diplomatic initiatives will face rejection or manipulation. Economic alternatives to Western-dominated systems will experience growing pains and inefficiencies. These failures do not invalidate the overall strategy. They are normal aspects of any complex, long-term undertaking. Learning from failures and adapting approaches is part of the process. Some nations will face severe consequences for their resistance, and these consequences will be visible and painful. Aid budgets will be slashed, leaving development projects unfunded. Trade agreements will be suspended or renegotiated on less favorable terms. Investment flows will diminish as foreign capital seeks more compliant destinations. International credit ratings will be downgraded, increasing borrowing costs. Diplomatic relations will cool, reducing access to forums and partnerships. These consequences are designed to be exemplary, to demonstrate to other nations what happens when you challenge foreign interests. The severity of these consequences will vary based on multiple factors. Nations with significant natural resources that foreign powers want to access may face harsher retaliation than those with less strategic value. Countries in regions where geopolitical competition is intense may experience greater pressure than those in less contested areas. Leaders who are particularly effective at mobilizing domestic and international support for sovereignty may be targeted more aggressively than those who pose less threat to foreign control. The variability makes it difficult to predict exactly what any particular nation will face, but the certainty that consequences will come is absolute. Some leaders will lose power because they prioritize sovereignty over accommodation. This political reality must be confronted directly rather than glossed over with optimistic rhetoric. Democratic leaders may face electoral defeat when economic hardships resulting from foreign retaliation turn voters against them. Authoritarian leaders may face coups or rebellions supported or encouraged by foreign powers seeking regime change. Even popular leaders with strong domestic support may be removed through various mechanisms: legal challenges, parliamentary maneuvers, military interventions, assassination. The historical record shows that foreign powers do not hesitate to remove leaders who threaten their interests. The personal risks leaders face when challenging foreign intelligence operations are substantial and must be weighed honestly. Some will be vilified in international media, their reputations destroyed through coordinated smear campaigns. Others will face legal prosecution in international courts on charges that may be fabricated or exaggerated. Still others will experience more direct threats to their safety and survival. Leaders considering whether to confront foreign interference must understand that they may pay personally for their choices, that defending national sovereignty may cost them their positions, their freedom, or even their lives. Some citizens will suffer economic hardship because their countries chose independence over dependency. These costs are real and must be acknowledged honestly. The economic hardships that result from confronting foreign control will not be distributed evenly across populations. Those working in sectors dependent on foreign aid or investment will face immediate job losses and income reductions. Farmers relying on export markets that become restricted will see prices fall and livelihoods threatened. Small businesses dependent on imported goods that become more expensive or unavailable will struggle or fail. Government employees whose salaries depend on aid-funded budgets may face payment delays or reductions. These are real people experiencing real suffering as a consequence of national decisions to prioritize sovereignty. The duration of these hardships is uncertain and depends on how quickly alternative economic arrangements can be established. Building regional trade networks to replace Western-dominated systems takes time. Developing domestic industries to produce goods previously imported requires investment and learning. Creating financial systems that operate independently of Western-controlled institutions demands technical expertise and international cooperation. During the transition period, which may last years, populations will endure reduced living standards and limited opportunities. Asking citizens to accept these sacrifices requires explaining why independence justifies hardship and demonstrating that the suffering serves a worthy purpose. The distribution of hardship raises questions of fairness and social justice. Wealthy elites with diversified assets and international connections can often insulate themselves from economic consequences that devastate ordinary citizens. Those with savings can weather temporary disruptions while those living paycheck to paycheck face immediate crisis. Urban populations with access to diverse economic opportunities may adapt more easily than rural communities dependent on single sectors. Governments must address these inequities through policies that share burdens equitably and protect the most vulnerable from bearing disproportionate costs. The political sustainability of sovereignty-focused policies depends heavily on how well governments manage these economic transitions and distribute their costs. If hardships are seen as temporary sacrifices necessary for long-term gain, populations may maintain support despite suffering. If they appear to be permanent conditions or benefits seem to accrue only to elites while masses suffer, support will erode and policies will become politically untenable. Communication, transparency, and equitable burden sharing are essential to maintaining popular backing through difficult transitions. But the alternative, continued subordination, is unacceptable. Accepting permanent foreign intelligence penetration means accepting permanent foreign control. It means resigning ourselves and our descendants to subordinate status in perpetuity. It means watching African resources extracted, African policies manipulated, African potential constrained, generation after generation, while we tell ourselves that resistance is too difficult or too costly. That path leads nowhere except deeper dependency and greater humiliation. The permanence of subordination under current arrangements must be understood clearly. Foreign intelligence operations are not temporary measures that will naturally phase out as African nations develop. They are structural features of relationships designed to maintain control indefinitely. As African capabilities grow, foreign intelligence efforts intensify to ensure that growing capacity does not translate into genuine independence. The surveillance becomes more sophisticated, the manipulation more subtle, the control more deeply embedded. Waiting for foreign powers to voluntarily relinquish their intelligence networks is futile. They will maintain and expand them as long as we permit them to do so. Resigning ourselves and our descendants to subordinate status in perpetuity means accepting that African potential will never be fully realized. Every generation will face the same constraints, the same manipulation, the same extraction. Children born today will grow up in societies where critical decisions are influenced by foreign intelligence services. They will inherit economies structured to serve external interests rather than local needs. They will live in nations that are independent in name but controlled in practice. They will pass these same conditions to their own children, perpetuating subordination across generations until it becomes so normalized that challenging it seems impossible. Watching African resources extracted while we tell ourselves that resistance is too difficult represents a particular kind of moral failure. Africa possesses extraordinary natural wealth, minerals, energy resources, agricultural potential, human capital. Yet this wealth has not translated into prosperity for African peoples because extraction serves foreign interests rather than local development. Foreign intelligence operations play crucial roles in maintaining these extractive relationships by identifying resources, manipulating policies to facilitate access, undermining leaders who attempt to renegotiate terms, and suppressing movements that demand fair compensation. As long as these operations continue, extraction will continue regardless of how unjust or unsustainable it becomes. African policies manipulated by foreign intelligence services cannot serve African interests effectively. When decisions about education are influenced by foreign agendas, schools fail to prepare students for national development needs. When economic policies are shaped by external pressure, industries that could generate employment and prosperity never develop. When security policies are compromised by foreign intelligence, nations cannot effectively defend themselves against external threats. When political systems are penetrated by foreign operatives, governance serves foreign masters rather than domestic populations. Every sector of national life suffers when foreign intelligence operations manipulate decision-making processes. African potential constrained generation after generation represents an incalculable loss, not just to Africa but to humanity. The continent possesses human talent, cultural richness, and innovative capacity that could contribute enormously to global progress. But this potential remains largely unrealized because systems of control prevent its full expression. How many African scientists never pursue research because educational systems are inadequate? How many African entrepreneurs never build businesses because economic policies favor foreign competitors? How many African artists never create because cultural institutions are dominated by external perspectives? How many African leaders never emerge because political systems are corrupted by foreign interference? The cumulative loss across generations is staggering. That path leads nowhere except deeper dependency and greater humiliation. Each year that passes under current arrangements makes change more difficult. Foreign intelligence networks become more entrenched. Economic structures become more locked in. Political systems become more compromised. Populations become more accustomed to subordination and less able to imagine alternatives. The psychological damage of prolonged subordination may ultimately prove more harmful than the material costs. When people internalize their own inferiority, when they accept that outsiders must make decisions for them, when they believe their own incapacity is natural rather than imposed, the chains become mental as well as physical. The unacceptability of continued subordination stems from both practical and moral considerations. Practically, foreign control prevents African development. Nations cannot industrialize when foreign powers manipulate policies to maintain them as raw material exporters. Populations cannot prosper when economic decisions serve external interests rather than local needs. Societies cannot advance when their most talented members emigrate because opportunities at home are limited by design. The development gap between Africa and other regions will not close as long as foreign intelligence services operate freely to maintain extractive relationships. The practical prevention of African development through foreign control operates through multiple mechanisms that reinforce each other. Industrial policy is one critical area where foreign intelligence influence blocks progress. When African nations attempt to move up value chains by processing raw materials domestically rather than exporting them for processing elsewhere, they face coordinated opposition. Foreign intelligence services identify these initiatives early and work to undermine them through various means, supporting political opposition, encouraging capital flight, manipulating currency values, orchestrating supply chain disruptions. The result is that African nations remain trapped as raw material exporters, earning minimal value while processing and manufacturing occur elsewhere. Trade policy represents another domain where foreign intelligence operations prevent development. When African nations attempt to negotiate favorable terms for their exports, or protect infant industries from overwhelming foreign competition, they face pressure to maintain open markets that serve foreign interests. Intelligence services identify negotiating strategies in advance, giving foreign governments and corporations unfair advantages. They compromise negotiators through various means, ensuring that agreements favor external parties. They support international institutions and frameworks that lock African nations into disadvantageous positions. The cumulative effect is trade relationships that extract wealth rather than generate prosperity. Morally, subordination violates human dignity and national sovereignty. Every people has the right to govern themselves, to determine their own priorities, to shape their own future. Foreign intelligence operations that manipulate African governments and societies deny these fundamental rights. They treat African nations as objects to be managed rather than subjects with agency. They assume African peoples lack the capacity or right to make their own decisions. This assumption is both false and offensive, and accepting it means internalizing the racist premises that justified colonialism. Together, we can reclaim what has been taken from us. Together, we can build an Africa that is truly free. This is not rhetoric or empty promise. It is achievable goal backed by demonstrated capability and proven resolve. Burkina Faso has shown the way. The path is clear. The question now is whether others will walk it with us, whether we will move forward together toward genuine independence, or whether we will remain divided and dependent, watching opportunities for transformation slip away while explaining to future generations why we lacked the courage to act when action was possible. The achievability of this goal rests on concrete evidence rather than wishful thinking. Burkina Faso successfully identified foreign intelligence networks, dismantled them, and expelled their operatives despite facing one of the world's most sophisticated intelligence agencies backed by superpower resources. If we could do it, others can too. The capability exists. The methods are proven. The primary requirement is political will, the determination to prioritize sovereignty over convenience, to accept risks in pursuit of independence, to stand firm against pressure and threats. The path forward is clear because Burkina Faso has mapped it through our own experience. Other nations need not start from scratch or invent new approaches. They can study what we did, adapt our methods to their circumstances, learn from our successes and mistakes, and implement their own operations with greater efficiency because they benefit from our pioneering effort. This knowledge transfer accelerates the process and reduces risks for those who follow. The question of whether others will join us is the defining issue of our era. It will determine whether African independence becomes reality or remains aspiration, whether sovereignty is reclaimed or surrendered, whether future generations inherit freedom or dependency. Every African leader, every security official, every citizen faces this question personally. Their individual choices will aggregate into collective outcome that shapes continental destiny for decades to come. History will judge harshly those who had the opportunity to act but chose comfort over courage, those who saw the path to freedom but refused to walk it, those who understood what was at stake but prioritized personal interest over national sovereignty. Conversely, history will honor those who stood firm when standing was difficult, those who chose principle over convenience, those who acted decisively when action mattered most. The choice between these legacies is being made right now, in capitals across Africa, by leaders whose decisions will echo through generations.